Need your daily fix on mixed martial arts?
We're going to kind of recap Bellator 155 from UFC 198.
Who's who?
Kind of a controversial decision.
And who's not?
I couldn't figure out why, and then it hit me.
Well, don't you fret, because Golden State Media Concepts got you covered. Get your daily dose of MMA podcasts. Everything from the UFC, Bellator Fighting Championships, Extreme Cage Fighting, Invicta Fighting Championships, and so much more. Join us as we talk about some of the biggest names in mixed martial arts. We've got you covered here on Golden State Media Concepts MMA Podcast.
Thank you for tuning into the GSMC MMA Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Untitled, hoping that your day is going well and totally awesome. And so, yes, although 2020 has been a very, very difficult year, we are right there at the end. We get to spend the holidays. You get to do whatever you want in the holidays. All right, then you can go and celebrate your time with your friends, with your family, or you can be alone and just watch some Charlie Brown Christmas specials out there. Whatever you want to do in the holidays, that's on you. But I know what I'm going to be doing during the holidays, and that is trying to keep up with the newest MMA news going out there because, with everything kind of stabilizing in the world of sports, basketball is going to get audience members back again. There's reports out there that some sporting events are going to bring in an actual crowd. And so, with Bellator, Invicta, One, UFC, with all of them kind of stabilizing themselves, getting a scheduled in, and understanding what they can potentially do in 2021, I am ready to go and endure the whole smorgasbord of mixed martial arts action. This past week, I had to go watch One, watch some Invicta, watch some PFL, a whole lot of shows to go for today. A whole many shows. A lot of shows I gotta watch to the point that I even missed out on a boxing pay-per-view event. And one of my friends earlier today bugged me about it. He's like, hey man, why didn't you watch this show? Well, I'm sorry, dude. I have a lot of shows to go watch. But today, I'll be discussing One Championship. Yes, we are back here at One Championships, an organization that I am really intrigued about. It's so different. When you watch Bellator, when you watch UFC, when you watch Invicta FC, all of them, I say right now, One Championships is incredibly close to Pride in terms of its presentation, because with Pride there's a huge aspect like to honor and tradition. There's a huge cultural aspect to One Championship, to which like what they're doing is based around like honor and respect and all that stuff. But if you watch a UFC show or Bellator, or even Invicta FC, the presentations kind of blended together in that it's very straightforward, very narrow. It's like, here's fighter A, here's fighter B, here are the rankings here, and if they win this fight, they'll go and move up to a certain ranking here. That kind of is how the same thing goes for One Championship, but it feels a lot more important in terms of the presentation of the show. And one thing I do kind of like, but also kind of don't like about One Championships, is that their commentary team. So their commentary team of... Wait, I'm trying to go find their names here. Okay, so it's Michael Chiavelli and Mitch Wilson. So unlike Dominic Cruz, Paul Felder, and at times John Anik, they actually like overhype the show. They overhype the show to the point where it gets kind of nauseating. So while Paul Felder, Anik, and Dominic Cruz, they kind of are riffing their shows. If you watch any UFC fight nights, there will be like brief moments where Dominic Cruz and Paul Felder are just joking with each other. They're just joking with each other. They're kind of making fun of the fighters, specifically the heavyweights. We've seen this happen with Goldberg and Joe Rogan, where they go from like professional, let's talk about the show, to like making jokes and like riffing. And some people like it, some people don't like it here. But Michael Chiavelli and Mitch Wilson, they do a good job promoting the heck and overhyping everything. They try to make it so that every single thing you see in a show is incredibly important, and everybody is like a world champion and is like a legend. Alright then, there are a lot of fighters here that I didn't recognize, and they were making references and making like, oh man, this guy is like the Mike Tyson. This dude is world-renowned superstar. Everyone in the world knows them. It's just like, yes, you're overhyping these fighters, and it's both a good thing and a bad thing. Good thing is that you're making them feel special. Bad thing in that it gets kind of nauseating. It does. And so, let me discuss here, One Championships. The name for today's pay-per-view event is called The Big Bang. Why is it called The Big Bang? Is it the beginning of something? Not really sure. But let's go watch right now. It is the beginning of something for some of these fighters in terms of their positioning, like within the within the rankings of One Championships in their respective divisions. But I really wouldn't call it the Big Bang. I'm not really sure what the title entails there. But let's go talk about the main event here. Main event has Mergorian against Ivan Kondridov. So Grigorian here. When the commentary team were talking about this fight, they're like, Grigorian, this guy is a legend. He is like an all-time great. One of the best there is, best there was, best there will be. This dude's an absolute legend in the world of kickboxing. Probably the greatest of all time. Grigorian is just better than like sliced bread. They're hyping up Grigorian so much throughout this entire 2.5 hour show that I was at the point that when I saw Grigorian, I was like, boo, I hate this guy. And then they were talking about Ivan Kondridov. So remember, Grigorian, they were like, this guy's a legend. He's one of the best ever. The entire world are watching and speculating what Grigorian is going to go do. Now Ivan Kondridov is Ivan Kondridov. The guy is serious. And that's about it. Grigorian, he gets the full-on, this guy's a living legend. Ivan Kondridov, they give him this guy, he tries his best. Come on. They overhype some things, but at the same time they underhype others. Yikes. So let's talk about the main event here. Grigorian versus Ivan Kondridov. This fight is under kickboxing rules here. One thing to note though is that, I now get it, no. They have the MMA, kickboxing, and Muay Thai. They have three different match types for each division. Specifically, they focus a whole lot on MMA. The way how I see it, it feels like emphasis focused on MMA. Second one, kickboxing. Third one, Muay Thai. That's how it kind of feels like. Also, in every One Championship event I've seen, for the most part, there's more representation in MMA and kickboxing, more so than Muay Thai. That's what I'm seeing. But this fight here between Grigorian and Kondridov, it is under kickboxing rules here. Now I'm going to tell you right now, my knowledge of the kickboxing scene is very lackluster. I follow a lot of the MMA scene, but specifically in kickboxing, I'm not really sure on this though. I just have to go by the word by Chevalier saying that Grigorian is just like the best ever. So going to this fight, there's a lot of expectations going on Grigorian, even as Grigorian isn't really even doing much in the first round, because he really doesn't do much like at all in the first round. It's, you know, there is so much like Holly Holm and like Ronda Rousey, where Goldberg is saying, Ronda Rousey, famous celebrity, the bright lights, commercials, movies, she's got her own brand going on, and he's saying this as Holly Holm is beating her up. That's what it feels like for Grigorian versus Kondridov, because he's like, Grigorian, one of the all-time greats. And then they even compare this to Mike Tyson versus Buster Douglas. For those of you who don't know, Mike Tyson versus Buster Douglas is one of the most famous and greatest fights out there in boxing history, in combat sports history, because in that fight, it was such a sure-in that Mike Tyson would go defeat Buster Douglas in order to prep up the Tyson versus Evander Holyfield fight, that even the corner crew did not know who the heck Buster Douglas was. Tyson did not train. They even bring the proper like materials and utilities you need for Mike Tyson or for your fighter when they go and take breaks in between rounds. It was expected that Tyson was going to go in and Buster Douglas in the first round, and instead Douglas ended up knocking out Mike Tyson in what has to be the biggest upset ever in combat sports history. So they're comparing Grigorian to Mike Tyson. And what's strange about this, Grigorian is only 29 years old. He's only 29. They're talking about him as if he's like living legend. I'm like, okay, he's probably like really great in the world of kickboxing, but like from my perspective right now, I don't see the big deal on him. I just don't, especially in that first round. But Kondridov here, playing the Buster Douglas position here, he's just teeing off. It was, even the commentary team, Mitch Wilson was saying, expect Grigorian to get a first-round knockout here. And Chevali's like, I wouldn't be surprised if Grigorian gets a first-round knockout here. And I'm reading, and as I read up Grigorian, it was said like this guy is like a flashy, overly aggressive, very like hyper fighter who goes in there, blitzes you, and just annihilates you within the matter of like minutes. So, as I read that, and I'm watching this fight, I'm looking at this, and Grigorian isn't really doing much here. Kondridov is just teeing off on Grigorian here, laying in some really good left-handed strikes, throwing in some leg kicks. Now, Grigorian is attempting some body kicks here, but Kondridov, he's eating these body kicks, and he's lunging in for, like, strikes to the head. Like, Kondridov pretty much becomes a headhunter for the latter half of the first round here. So while Kondridov is being very aggressive here, landing a lot of shots, and Kondridov, he's fighting his angles. He's able to go punch through all of Grigorian's defenses here, and Grigorian really couldn't, he really couldn't download the information fast enough to prevent himself from getting a knockdown. Kondridov gets a knockdown on Grigorian. Chevali is losing his mind. Mitch Wilson is absolutely losing his mind here. And you know what? The knockdown here, it really wasn't really a knockdown, more like he stunned Grigorian. Grigorian fell down on one knee. And then, like, the referee stopped it, and then he just did the count out for Grigorian. Grigorian's able to stand up. And so first round easily goes to Kondridov for the knockdown and the sheer high volume of strikes. And so now we go to the second round here. Second round, Grigorian becomes what Wilson and Chevali and everything I've read about Grigorian, he became that. This dude, with no fear, he stopped blocking. Just blitzed through right to Kondridov, landed a hard freaking liver punch, overwhelmed the heck out of him, and won the fight via KO. KO via liver punch in the second round. Wow, Grigorian, when he gets going, is a great fighter. Really great here. And I was super disappointed in the first round, to which this guy, oh man, what's the big hype of this dude? He's not really doing anything here. Well, guess what? Kondridov, he gets a liver shot to his tummy. He falls down like a sack of potatoes, man. And Grigorian wins the fight. And then afterwards, in the post-fight presser, Chevali, like a proper like fangirl, is like, Grigorian, well, like, what do you expect to do here in one championship? Can we see you fight for the title? And Grigorian's like, you know what? When I get around it, I'm gonna get around it. And then that's pretty much about it. That's pretty much it for Harut Grigorian versus Ivan Kondridov. Once again, my overall knowledge on kickboxing isn't all that. It's not all that thought of. Like, I have very little knowledge of kickboxing. For all I know, Harut Grigorian truly is like one of the best ever. I look at his like win-loss record. The guy really does have a great record, but I'm still not really sure of how great Grigorian is, and especially me being a person who specifically focuses on watching mixed martial arts contests. Note this: if it was an MMA bout, Kondridov, when he stunned Grigorian, Kondridov could have just pressed forward and, potentially won the fight. Really could have. But you know what? Good on Ivan Kondridov there. I think in the first round, he was overly aggressive. Grigorian didn't answer back through any of his strikes. And in the second round, Ivan Kondridov, he just continued the pace. He continued the same pace from the first round. But the Grigorian that he fought in the second round was very, very different from the Grigorian from the first round. First round Grigorian was like, okay, let me just download the information here. Kind of like rope-a-doping. I'm going to go down the information I'm getting from Ivan. I'm going to take whatever shots. I know I am tough enough to take these shots. And then when it went in between rounds, the cornermen, they're yelling at Harut Grigorian. They're like, hey dude, you gotta do something. You're just sitting there eating shots. And Harut Grigorian's like, okay, you know what? I am eating these shots, but I now know where the openings are. I'm gonna go and pick apart Ivan Kondridov. And that's what he did there. Really strong performance by both fighters here. Kondridov shows that he has no fear Even when the lights are on him, he has got no fear competing against the highest of levels here in the main event of a one championship show. Grigorian, making his one championship debut, goes in there with a vicious knockout, impressed by both fighters, and I expect big things coming from both of them down the line. And as I look down the card here for One Championship's Big Bang, it is a night full of action. We got prospects trying to make a name for themselves, some fighters trying to get inside the top 5 rankings, because in One Championships, it only goes up to the top 5 in the rankings. There is no top 10. And there is a fighter out here who's trying to make an impressive performance in order to become the number 1 contender for a belt. You are listening to the GSMC MMA podcast. I am Harut Grigorian, coming back after this short break here. See you soon.
Check out the show built around the women of MMA. From the UFC to the extreme cage fighting, we got the fights covered.
Listen.
It's the Golden State Media Concepts Women's MMA Podcast. The latest news of upcoming fights, discussions of previous matches. Join us as we talk to and about the biggest names in women's mixed martial arts, past, present, and future. When it's the women's fight game, you know where to listen to. The Golden State Media Concepts Women's MMA Podcast. This is your ultimate stop for everything sports. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Should I say more? From the NFL, MLB, the NBA to MMA, it's all in here. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Listen now.
And I'm back, and so I'm discussing the rest of One Championship's Big Bang. And in the co-main event, we have Gary Tonin versus Koyomi Matsushima at an MMA bout in the featherweight division. I put down my notes here. Gary Tonin, wrestling exhibition. So Gary Tonin came to this fight with a 100% finish rates. He got 100% finish rates. Matsushima, one-punch knockout artist here. This pretty much was the battle of the grappler versus striker, and in most cases, the grappler typically defeats a striker. And in this scenario here, it is true. Gary Tonin, for 3 rounds of action, just out-grappled, just out-wrestled Matsushima, and placed him on the ground, took away the striking ability, and by the time Matsushima was able to land in some strikes, which were in the 3rd round, Matsushima was so tired and so gassed from the wrestling ability from Gary Tonin that he just couldn't put enough out there to go and defeat Tonin, and really did enough damage to go and win over the judges. For the first and second round, it really was Gary Tonin. He goes there, he shoots in, and he wrestles you for about 4 minutes. He wrestles you, he's not letting you get up. He's putting so much pressure and work on you that there's no way you could go recover. By the time you get back up, you're already exhausted, you're already tired. Gary Tonin has incredible cardio. Incredibly high level of cardio, so by the time we get to the 3rd round here, he pretty much outpaces his opponents. So Matsushima, he's pretty much tired in the 3rd round. He can't really be all aggressive. In the 1st and 2nd round, Matsushima was incredibly aggressive, but then it just led to Gary Tonin shooting in for a double leg takedown. And in the 3rd round, Matsushima, he was landing some shots, but he was a lot more tentative in attempting for strikes, because if he became aggressive, Tonin would go and just... The really cool thing about Tonin was that he had a very quick snap. He's very quick and very fast in shooting in for takedowns, to the point that it led to Matsushima being like, okay, I'm not even going to try to go and be overly aggressive on this guy, but he's going to go shooting for a takedown, and I'm afraid of him going in for a submission or a heel hook, so I'm just going to go and try to poke him in the 3rd round. Sadly though, poking him in the 3rd round was a little too late. Tonin just did enough in the 1st and 2nd round to the point that Tonin pretty much win this fight off the basis that he put in so much work in those first 2 rounds. And by the time the 3rd round happened, Matsushima had a lot of leg to go keep up with here, and he just didn't have enough time to go and win this bout. So the winner of this fight here via unanimous decision goes to Gary Tonin. On the post-fight interview here, he challenges featherweight champ Tan Lee, and so we're going to see Gary Tonin versus Tan Lee happening at some time 2021. In January of 2021, this is coming from Chatri himself, he says that he's expecting a atomweight Grand Prix tournament coming up. And if he's thinking that far ahead, chances are, like a tournament. Oh my goodness. During COVID times. And if you saw the last UFC show, there was a bunch of fights that ended up getting canceled a week into fight week. And so for a Chapter to be so confident in himself, being like, yeah, man, Grand Prix tournament coming up. And we got a whole lot of events also coming up. And I got my version of The Apprentice showing up. Yeah, a lot of things are coming up for one championships there. So Gary Tonin versus Stan Lee, that's going to be coming up. And I expect Tonin to win. I do. Because Stan Lee, he's never truly been challenged on the ground. That's the problem. Whenever Stan Lee faces off against a grappler, Stan Lee typically wins. But I don't think he has ever faced a grappler who has a high level as Gary Tonin. And then we got here, okay, so this was a very amusing fight here. And this fight is Murat the Butcher Igon versus Anderson Silva. First off, the Anderson Silva is not the Anderson Silva that you're probably thinking of. This is some other Brazilian. It is some other Brazilian who is a kickboxer versus the Butcher, Murat Igon, and Chiavelli loves the Butcher. You know why? Because I can guarantee you, if you rewatch this show, and it's all out there like on YouTube, you can like from Bleacher Report Live, they put the entire One Championship shows happen a day afterwards. So if you watch this show, Igon, he's just constantly saying the Butcher, the Butcher, the Butcher, the Butcher, the Butcher, the Butcher, over and over again. Like, you couldn't go 7 seconds without this dude saying the Butcher is the Butcher. And as he is walking out to the cage, he starts saying a story. He's like, do you know why they call Murat the Butcher? You know why? You know why? Because his actual job occupation was that he was a butcher. And also, he butchers his opponents. And I'm like, oh my gosh. Oh no. Chiavelli, dude, okay, you're making it really tough to go watch a show. Oh man, it's so cringy. So, the Butcher versus Anderson Silva in a kickboxing bout at light heavyweight. Mitch Wilson, he is ready, like Dominic Cruz, he is ready to make fun of these fighters for being big. Look at these big boys here. Don't expect anything exciting here, but just two guys going at it, rock'em sock'em robots. And by the way, Paul Felder literally said, no, it's either Felder or Dominic Cruz in it was the last UFC event where they covered. It was a heavyweight, and they said literally rock'em sock'em robots from the fights here. So no, I'm not making fun of them with the rock'em sock'em robots thing. Like, that's what they actually say. That's how they actually perceive fighters who are above 185 pounds. Like, look at these meatheads here, man. They're too big. So, first round is, once again, my knowledge of kickboxing, not all that well. First round, I'm really unsure of who actually won the first round. Because both guys were just throwing out shots, but both of them were throwing at an equal volume, or sort of equal volume, and I really couldn't tell who was winning in many of these exchanges here, because both their exchanges were pretty similar. It's like 2-punch combination ending off with a leg kick and a body kick. Like, if one guy goes in for a leg kick, other guy gives back the receipt, body kick. These two guys are pretty much mirroring each other, Silva and the Butcher. So second round, Silva does get a knockdown, which makes it a lot more easier for me to go and call the fight here. And then the third round goes to the Butcher for being more active and pulling out more combinations here. Anderson Silva was very passive in that fight here. And Chiavelli goes on to say, obviously, Silva won second round. Obviously, the Butcher won the third round. And it's in the first round, the round where I said I was unsure of who actually won the fight, was going to be the deciding factor on who won. Because for the most part here, it's very obvious who won second and third round, but you're really unsure on who won that first round. And winner of the fight via unanimous decision, Murat the Butcher Igon. So good on him for that. Mitch Wilson and Chiavelli, when it got to the decision, they're like, can you believe these two fighters? I thought one of them would have been knocked out. Oh man, you wouldn't think so, would you, consider how they fight? It's so passive-aggressive how they insult fighters who are above 185 pounds. It really is. And so we have another fight. We have Andy Sauer versus Zhang Chunyu at Kickboxing. So we got another kickboxing bout here. No representation for Muay Thai for some reason. So Andy Sauer, I put it on notes here. It's hard for me to call both fighters. They are constantly training. It's very similar to the Butcher versus Silva fight. And the first round is just them just trading off like the sheer similar numbers of volume strikes. It's like very, very similar as the volume strikes here. At one point, the two proceed to just trade body kicks. It was like, it's them boxing, then they both look at each other, then they start trading body kick, body kick, body kick. And these body kicks are really stiff, and they're not really defending it. Neither of them are defending body shots. Neither of them are grabbing the legs for, I don't know if in kickboxing you can grab a leg and then go for a counter hit. Not really sure on that, but they're just eating these body kicks. They're eating the body kicks, and then Andy Sauer here, he, with vicious combinations, he does these like combinations as if he's like Jin Kazama from Tekken in the third round. And so, while first round was kind of meh, second round was just them giving shots at each other. Third round was the only round you can really say, okay, Sauer obviously won the third round here. And I'm guessing then, like, second round, Sauer ended up winning. So, Andy Sauer wins the fight via unanimous decision there. I really couldn't get to this fight. I just really couldn't. Because, like, the kickboxing rules, I'm not really sure of. And when you see consider there's, like, a consecutive number of of the last 4 fights, 3 of them are kickboxing. It does get tiresome watching it. And then we have Bokang Masiani versus Rene Catalan in an MMA bout in the strawweight division. So Catalan, he is ranked number 3 while Bokang is undefeated going in. Mitch Wilson on commentary, he goes on to say, this is a recipe for disaster for Bokang Masiani to strike with Catalan. And as he's saying that, Bokang clinches with Catalan and hits him with a vicious knee strike. Puts Catalan out. Catalan is stunned, which leads to Bokang coming over, hitting him with a left high kick, and wins the fight via KO in 40 seconds into the first round. Mitch Wilson being like, you know what? Bokang, he really shouldn't strike with him. Grappling is a better idea for Bokang today. I don't really see, a knockout happening. And oh my gosh, knee! Oh my gosh, high kick! Wow, Bokang gets a knockout. And then Mitch Wilson, you can hear it in his breath, being like sighing to be like, yeah, I saw that coming. Like, oh my gosh. If there's one thing to be upset about for One Championships is that their commentary team is super passive aggressive. They're either overly biased, they're either overly hyped, over biased. They're always throwing shades to these fighters here, and at times they can come across as pretty dumb. Pretty dumb here. To the point I have to go replay the fights, and I just to hear Mitch Wilson be like, yeah man, Bokang here, he shouldn't strike him at all. 4 seconds later, high kick. Wow! Oh my goodness. You heard me say that he shouldn't have struck. Well, good thing he didn't listen to me. Good thing Bokang did not listen to me, because if I was at his corner, I would have given him bad advice. Wow. Congratulations there for Bokang Masiani. He was able to go and knock out the number 3 ranked fighter in the strawweight division. Which means, Bokang, man, you are currently ranked. Congratulations. You are a ranked fighter in the strawweight division. At the very least, you should be a ranked fighter in the strawweight division. And as I'm speaking, actually, this thing pops up right now on my feed. So, first off, we have Gary Tonin. He explains his Beowulf callouts of Thunley, because if you haven't seen the post-fight presser, I just summarized it and simplified it, being like, alright, Gary Tonin, he challenges Thunley, but this guy, as if he's a WWE wrestler, does a full-on wrestling promo after the fights. He starts rhyming words, he starts saying things that normal human beings wouldn't say. He speaks like a cartoon character, challenging his opponent, being like, you know what, man, I am the fear, and like, fear fears me, and there's no one who could stop me. It's very... Gary Tonin, he knows how to market himself. He does. And as I am saying that he knows how to market himself, he goes on to say that he's aware that people are tuning in to watch me get knocked out. He's under the same boat of like Chael Sonnen and Ben Askren, like, if I play as a complete douchebag and a jerk in my promos and my interviews, then I'm going to become more popular. And to an extent, it sometimes works. Sometimes. Or it just goes on and it turns people. And as he is deterring people, he goes on to say that, so this is coming in from Sportskita, submission specialist Gary Tonin believes he would make Khabib Nurmagomedov tap. He would. So, and then it leads to like a video of Gary Tonin knocking somebody out. So Gary Tonin believes, as reported by Jits Magazine, Gary Tonin asserted that if he were to face Khabib in a pure grappling matchup, he'd surely submit the UFC legend. You're going to say, I think if we ever had a pure grappling match, I'd pretty handily submit Khabib. The same way if I had a pure wrestling match against somebody who was an extremely dominant wrestler. More than likely, they would beat me, but it would still be a fun, cool experience either way. So, do you think Gary Tonin would fare well against Khabib? Well, first off, if they were to compete in the same division, i.e. lightweights, and they were to both grapple each other, I would say anything's possible. Anything is very, very possible. I still want to... I think I saw an AK video where Daniel Cormier's always saying, hey, watch out, Khabib. Jordan Barrows can beat you. Jordan Barrows can beat you. USA all the way. And Khabib was like, nah, man. No one can beat me. I would want to see Khabib in 2021 have a pure wrestling match. I want to see that. I want to see how it turns out. Some people say Khabib wouldn't make it in Olympic-style wrestling. Some people say he's only good for MMA wrestling. Well, I have to praise Gary Tonin for being confident in himself at the very least. You're listening to the GSMC MMA podcast, coming back after the short break here. See you soon.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play. This is your ultimate stop for everything sports. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Should I say more? From the NFL, MLB, the NBA to MMA, it's all in here. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Listen now.
And I'm back. And so I'm discussing one championships at the Big Bang. And the fight for ice for me, which was the fight of the night, I'm covering Bi Njuyen versus Jihin Radzuan. It's an MMA bout in the atomweight division. I've been very vocal in the fact that I've always wanted an atomweight division in the UFC. Hopefully it happens in the year 2021 if they don't plan on doing anything for the women's feather division. So I'll go through my notes here. Jihin is constantly throwing in leg kicks, but Njuyen is landing a lot more in counter strikes. Njuyen is winning the majority of the 50-50 exchanges. Jihin clinches and eats a lot of shots of Njuyen, and what Jihin does the thing that I wish more grapplers were willing to do. Alright then? It's like Jihin, Khabib, Merab Dvalishvili, like these fighters are fighters that when they go and shoot in for a takedown, they have no fear. Absolutely zero fear in the sense that they'll endure some strikes as they go and attempt the takedown. All right, like I don't get what is up with some of these wrestlers here. Like this coming from Yoel Romero, also, to which they have to understand that it is almost impossible not to do a takedown and not to endure some damage. Like as you're making your way towards them, shooting in for a single leg or a double leg takedown. Since your arms are down, you're leaving your head open, and you will endure some quick shots to the face. Alright then, there's no way you can take down a person in MMA, like in the modern MMA setting, and not get hit a couple times. If you get taken to the ground, natural instincts, your opponent at the bottom is going to go hit some shots at you from the bottom position. It just normally happens. And what Jihin does, what Mergorian does, what Khabib do, when they shoot her for a takedown, they're like, okay, I know I'm going to go and eat some shots here, but whatever. I'd rather go and get the takedown in, land it, and gain advantage of ground control here, and potentially win the fight, instead of picking and choosing when to do the safest takedown ever, even though usually those safe takedowns almost never actually appear, or they come by like in the third round, and at that point it's too late. I like how assertive Jihin is in trying to assert her dominance in this fight, and it does help her out. It does, but in this scenario here, it helps her out like later in the fight here. But as of right now here in this fight, Jihin does attempt a takedown, eat some shots by Njuyen. But what Njuyen does here is that as Jihin is coming towards her, Njuyen reverses the momentum and is the one who gets the takedown instead. Njuyen does this like sidestep, kind of like toss on Jihin. It works out for her, although Njuyen isn't all that well adept in terms of keeping her opponent onto the ground and gaining an advantage. But you know what? She does get takedown in, and she does do a little bit of ground and pound here. The two proceed as they're grappling to do like reverse. They try to reverse positions on each other, and it's like really cool because like Jihin and Njuyen are like doing barrel rolls like over on top of each other and trying to get like better positioning here. Njuyen, through all the reversals, is finally able to go get on top, the base, like on full guard position, and she's trying to square up for some more ground and pound. But there is a point here where Njuyen is like, you know what? No ground and pound. I'm gonna go and get up here. But what Jihin does though is that she places her at a butterfly lock, and so she's holding like the back of her neck, and she's keeping Njuyen onto the ground here. She's keeping Njuyen on the ground, and she's trying to go and work her way. So there are instances here where Jihin is actually the one controlling Njuyen in the ground, even though Jihin is in the bottom position here. So things are looking bad for Njuyen, but she escapes, then hits hammer fists. It's like Jihin gets a butterfly lock, keeps Njuyen to the ground, then reverses, gets on top of Njuyen. Njuyen reverses yet again, and starts going again, starts doing ground pound action after Jihin attempts a rear naked choke. So Jihin gets up as the two start trading blows in the final 30 seconds. I put here, Njuyen wins the first round, but it was a really bad predicament that Njuyen was in that there was a real possibility that Jihin could have tapped out Njuyen, and Njuyen was able to escape. But if Jihin were to do it over again and make some slight adjustments, Jihin could have won that fight. So although Njuyen won the first round, a lot of confidence is being carried over to the second round in favor of Jihin. And you have to remember that in one championship MMA bouts, the judges score the fight accumulatively. Now, I'm not sure how that exactly works though, because people's perceptions of how fights play out though are very, very different. Joe Rogan said it best. So if there's a fight between two people, who really won a fight if a bell sounds and the fight just ends? The person who's kicking the other person's butt for about 10 out of the 12 minutes, or the one person who is like on top in the very end with his arms raised and being like, yeah, I'm beating your butt like in the final 2 minutes here. Like, who really won the fight? It's also, I'm thinking of the Jon Jones versus Dominic Reyes fight. Dominic Reyes was winning. He won 1 through 3, but lost 4 and 5. And the logic behind why it was justifiable as to why Jon Jones won the fight was because in the very end, Jon Jones was winning. And I'm thinking to myself, well, you can't apply the same logic if Dominic Reyes won rounds 1 through 4 and Jon Jones won the final 5th round. I'm just saying it doesn't really add up. But in one championship, it doesn't matter who actually, it does and it doesn't matter who wins at a per round basis. All that matters is that you're doing really well for yourself, or you've done well for yourself accumulatively throughout all 3 rounds of action. It's very difficult how to judge fights, but at least it's not meant to be or supposed to be a round per round basis. And so I put here, so first round goes for Njuyen barely. In the second round, Jihin actually wins the stand-up exchanges in the beginning. So she goes in, clinches with her, throws in some knee strikes, throws in some forearms, and some short elbows. Jihin hits some Muay Thai knees. Nguyen gets a takedown in, but after 45 seconds, they stand up. So Nguyen, she gets a takedown, but she really didn't work. She didn't really control on the ground or did that much work in ground and pounding. So Nguyen goes for a left body kick, but Jihin catches the leg kick and gets a takedown in herself. Jihin gets on mount position. Nguyen turns over as Jihin gets on. So Nguyen turns over. Jihin goes from mount position to backpack mount position and starts to ground and pound her. Jihin hits a back elbow, then attempts a rear naked choke. Nguyen turns over and gets on top at full guard. Good job there by Nguyen. Great grappling by both competitors here. As they get up using the cage, Jihin clinches and lands a knee. Nguyen clips Jihin with a couple left hands as the round ends. Second round goes for Jihin for winning at both ends of the fight, winning in the stand-up and winning in the ground. So how I look at the fight, first round Nguyen, second round Jihin. Third round, probably the deciding round here. We have Nguyen. Nguyen is being a lot more tentative in her striking here, but that's not a bad thing here. It's not a bad thing because in the Marvin Vettori fight, when he fought in the Marvin Vettori versus Jack Hermanson fight, in the third round, Vettori was very passive and tentative, and he really didn't do anything. He didn't do anything. Nguyen, though, she's passive and tentative, but she's still deadly accurate. I say in terms of accuracy from shots landed versus shots attempted, the most efficient striking came in that final third round. Because in the first and second round, there was a lot of Nguyen just swinging her arms and hopefully she gets a knockout. In the third round, she was deadly darn accurate and she was picking her shots perfectly well. Perfectly well. So, although Nguyen is being a lot more tentative here, she's being very accurate. Jihin tries to do pump kicks to distance herself here. Jihin is struggling, trying to go land some significant strikes here in the stand-up. Jihin tries to clinch with Nguyen, but Nguyen holds onto Jihin and powers her onto the cage, preventing there to be spacing for Jihin to go throw in some elbows and knees yet again from the clinch. Jihin actually lands a grazing left elbow onto the cage, then an up kick to the face. Nguyen lands a combination with a left hook, then shoots in for a takedown. Nguyen gets on mount and lands some ground and pound as the bell sounds. Third round, in my book, goes to Nguyen. And the reason for that is, for every big shot Jihin gave, whether it be a high kick or an up kick or a hard elbow, there were multiple times where Killer Bi Njuyen just goes in there, hits a vicious left counter hook punch, and stuns Jihin. So, and here's what I believe. I say Jihin gets one really good shot in, which leads to Nguyen getting 3 really good shots herself. And as I am saying that, if you watch the replays and if you're the commentary team, they focused a lot more on Jihin's strikes more than Nguyen's. And it's understandable because it's very clunky how Nguyen strikes, but it's very crisp and pretty, and it looks just really impressive like in the big monitor or in the screen to go see Jihin strikes compared to Nguyen. But Nguyen was still able to go land in some really good combinations. So, who really won the fight here? It was a very close bout, very close one. If these two women were to battle out 100 times, there's a real possibility it could go 50-50. 50 wins for Nguyen and 50 wins for Jihin. So, as the two fighters, they go to the center of the cage here. The announcer is preparing to announce the fighter. He's saying the judges' scorecards. So, one of these fighters ends up winning by unanimous decision. Bi Njuyen, she looks excited. She's looking at the camera. She's hopping. You can tell that she's like, yeah, man, I won this fight. I won it. Meanwhile, Jihin is being pretty indifferent. Because if you think about it, once again, this fight is judged accumulatively, and there's no possibility one of the judges scored a fight is a type of judge who would favor the fighter who, by the end of things, looks like they're winning. And by the end of things, Nguyen was winning. But it turns out the winner by unanimous decision goes to Jihin Radzuan. Congratulations there for Jihin. Nguyen looks so confident prior to the announcement, but then she was like devastated. She gave the Angela Hill, Michelle Watterson face of being like, yeah, man, I so won that fight. That fight was all me. And then she gave the old face to the camera like, what? I lost that? What? So that's very upsetting there. It was reported that Killer Bi Njuyen would be competing for the Grand Prix atomweight tournament, but that's just speculation. It was speculated she would be good in that position. I would love to see Njuyen compete then, but if Njuyen isn't going to be competing in the Grand Prix tournament, we could see Jihin replace Killer Bi instead. That's a real possibility. But Njuyen, it was a very close bout here, and even though Njuyen lost the fight, she could put her head held up high here and be like, yeah, I put it all out on the line here, and that was a very close fight, and I know if I could fight her again, I could win. So, really strong performance there, and I'm really excited for the future for both these women. And so the last fight from One Championship's Big Bang is Ritu Phogat versus Joe Mary Torres. It's an MMA bout in the atomweight division. Now, me being a Californian Filipino, of course, I'll be cheering for the Filipina, Joe Mary Torres. But things didn't turn out how she expected. So, this fight here between Ritu Phogat and Joe Mary Torres here. So, Ritu Phogat, this woman's a beast, alright? This woman, her striking has a lot left to be desired, admittedly. Joe Mary Torres, her striking ability compared amongst the top 5, because here's the thing, if whoever wins this fight is expected to go fight against a top 5 fighter in the atomweight division. Ritu Phogat, she's the one who ended up winning this fight here. But Joe Mary Torres, her striking ability compared to fighters amongst the top 5 is night and day here. Night and day, and the fact that Joe Mary Torres was outstriking Ritu Phogat shows that, you know what, Ritu Phogat, you are a great wrestler. Absolutely great, stellar wrestler here. But your striking reminds me of that of a frail whale. And what I mean by that is because when I say frail whale, that's how I describe a fighter or an athlete who looks physically dominating, but when they actually go in and perform an action, that sheer dominance just wanes down, and that's how I see Ritu Phogat here. And that she's always bigger and stronger than her opponents, and it's very evident that when she grapples and wrestles them. But when it comes to the striking, I'd be like, okay, so Joe Mary Torres, Ritu Phogat, I want the both of you to go punch that bag. Who will punch that bag harder? Easily, Joe Mary Torres. Ritu Phogat, your punching ain't all that well, but your grappling is on point excellence. And so, coming back after the short break here, I'll further discuss the fight between Ritu Phogat and Joe Mary Torres right here at the GSMC MMA podcast. See you after the short break.
Want to know the latest in soccer? Then listen to the Golden State Media Concepts Soccer Podcast. From MLS, the World Cup, and the Premier League, we've got you covered. The latest updates, the hottest matches, and news on the league's top players. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Soccer Podcast.
David Beckham scores the goal to take England all the way to the World Cup finals.
Listen now.
And I'm back. I'm discussing One Championship's Big Bang here. Discussing Ritu Phogat versus Joe Mary Torres here. I put on my notes the two meet at the center with Torres winning in the exchanges here. I've been saying that Joe Mary Torres, her striking ability isn't all that special, but it's good enough to go and stomp Ritu Phogat here, whose striking ability is pretty much non-existent. 1 minute into the first round, Ritu Phogat is able to get a takedown. And what's very cool and interesting about this fight is that Ritu Phogat ends up doing something that a lot more fighters really should do, in the sense that they are able to go and transition between positions very seamlessly, and they're constantly being active instead of pursuing just one specific position. What I mean by that is, during this fight, while Ritu Phogat is at full guard position, she ends up moving over to her left for half guard. And then what she wants to do is then go into side control position, go pin down her opponent in a crucifix, and then lay in some ground and pound action. Instead, what happened though was that she went from full guard to left side half guard, and her opponent, Jo Mary Torres, does a really good job stopping Rita Fogart from transitioning into that side control. She's like grabbing her arm, holding her legs, constantly moving and squirming, preventing her moving to side control. And so here's what Rita Fogart does. She goes from full guard to half guard on the left side, tries to go pass through, can't pass through, goes back to full guard, then moves over to the right side of the half guard position. And I'm like, oh my goodness, why don't more fighters do this? Why are some fighters so stuck to like being just trying to go and win a position for an extensively long period of time? Why don't they try to do something different? Why don't they try and keep working on their opponent, make them keep guessing, so the grappling becomes a lot more irritating and it stuffs them? So what Fogart does is go from full guard, half guard, then to other side, half guard. And one thing that was evident in Jo Mary Torres' defense was that she was really good at defending her opponent from moving over to side control position only on one side. So when Rita Fogart moved over to the right side and tried to pass over to side control position on the right side, it led to Jo Mary Torres moving her entire upper body over just to one side to prevent her opponent from moving over and getting side control, which leads to Rita Fogart finding the position she needed, because with Jo Mary Torres being overcommitted to protecting her weak side, she wasn't able to protect her other side, which led to Rita Fogart moving over back to the left side half guard position, getting side control on the left side, pinning her opponent's arm, and being able to rain down some ground and pound shots there. So Rita Fogart does end up winning the fight here by ground and pound TKO. Congratulations for Rita Fogart. A strong showing there by Jo Mary Torres, but her wrestling ability wasn't good enough to withstand Rita Fogart's wrestling. And with Fogart's victory, she's now on her way to compete amongst the top 5 of the atomweight division, and if she gets one more win, she could potentially become the next number one contender for Angela Lee's atomweight title. What's very interesting about a Rita Fogart and an Angela Lee fight is the fact that Rita Fogart, that's what I believe, has never really been tested fighting against another fighter who is as good of a grappler as she is. Because Angela Lee, she's a great grappler, and both these fighters are both grapplers and wrestlers who go shooting for takedowns very differently. So for Rita Fogart, she's all power. She's all power because her striking game isn't all that there. It's still developing. I would say Angela Lee, she's also developing, but she's developed so much at such a young age. She's only in her early 20s compared to Rita Fogart, who's in her mid-20s. But Rita Fogart, she's trying to go and dial in and trying to get better in her striking ability. So she just primarily focuses on her wrestling and shooting for takedown and being a lot more stronger and a lot more dominant than any of her opponents and winning fights through ground and pound action. Meanwhile, Angela Lee, she is deceptively quick in her takedowns and is very snappy in getting them down. So what Angela Lee does, instead of just shooting in, going for a double leg or a single leg, she strikes her way into clinching position. Then from clinch, she then goes for a leg trip and then slowly controls her opponent from there. So both Angela Lee and Rita Fogart, they're both great wrestlers, but both of them, the way how they handle the wrestling are very different. Very, very different. Stark contrast between the two of them. And I believe here, it's a really good test to see on who truly is the best grappler at the atomweight division there. Now, we do have some fighters here that Rita Fogart has to go through. One of them, Meng Bo, that's one fighter that I really want to see, because I want to see Bo versus Rita Fogart just to see how quick Rita Fogart will go and focus in on trying to go get a takedown in. Because here's the thing, when she tried for the first minutes of the first round and tried to battle it out with Jo Mary Torres, she was being clipped. And there's no way she can get away with that and being clipped by her opponent, especially as good as Meng Bo. And you definitely don't want to be in a position where Angela Lee can go clinch with you and get a takedown. So when Rita Fogart competes amongst the top 5 of the atomweight division, it'll be very interesting to see on how good she handles the pressure. And as I am speaking, it is announced from both ESPN and at MMAfighting.com that Floyd Mayweather and Logan Paul announced an exhibition boxing match on February 20. And if you decide to look at the Twitter, amongst people who do not watch boxing or any combat sports, they have this weird idea that Floyd Mayweather is going to go knock out Logan Paul. Not going to happen, alright? It ain't going to happen. These two are going to have an exhibition boxing match to which nothing really is going to win. Nothing really is going to happen here. I don't expect either fighter to go win. It's going to be a draw. Whatever happens, happens. Okay, then I can imagine Logan Paul trying to go in and try to knock out Floyd Mayweather. But Mayweather, he has such a high fight IQ, they ain't going to happen. It's not going to happen. It's either going to be Floyd Mayweather winning the fight by decision, or it's going to go and be a draw. No matter what happens, people are making money. And there are a lot of people who are upset about that on Twitter. And I'm just like, you know what, dude? Okay, 2020 is a weird year. 2021 is also going to be a weird year right now because it's not like COVID is going to magically disappear by the end of 2020. Presence of COVID is still going to be around. And with the presence of COVID being around in 2021, we can continue to expect the weird things happening in the world. And the world is a very, very strange place. And it's not just due to COVID, but also culturally. You know, America's culture is also kind of weird. It just is. Or at the very least, like, Western culture is very weird as it pertains to, like, we have one of the all-time great boxers fighting against some, like, internet guy. Just what's going on here? It's strange. It's just strange. One thing to note, though, was that in the post-fight presser for the UFC Fight Night that happened last weekend, Dana White was talking about how it was very weird. One of the judges, specifically Chris Lee, because he scored one of the judges, the Roman Belice fight, he thought Roman Belice lost that fight. And Dana White called out Chris Lee on this, and he says, yeah, dude, like, I'll talk with the Nevada State Athletic Commission, the Nevada State Athletic Commission, and we're going to see what we can go do to deal with this guy here. So, yes, Dana White will finally do something about this guy, but it's also a maybe. Like, Dana White has always been saying, dude, man, like, these judges, they're going to mess things up for somebody one of these days. Well, I'm still waiting for the day Dana White becomes assertive into trying to solve that issue. And yikes, we've got a dark story here to end up the podcast here, sadly. So this coming in from MMAJunkie.usatoday.com, to which New Mexico Jiu-Jitsu instructor, MMA veteran Rafael Freitas, jailed on rape charges, is coming in by the general MMA Junkie staff. 8-time MMA veteran and Gracie Barra Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu New Mexico head instructor Rafael Barada Freitas has been jailed on charges of criminal sexual penetration, according to the Albuquerque Journal. Freitas' arrest stems from an alleged November 7 incident in which Freitas is accused of drugging and raping a client. According to a criminal complaint obtained by the newspaper, the female client captured the alleged assault on a security camera in her living room. Freitas was in the corner of former UFC Women's Bantamweight champion Holly Holm in an October win over Irene Aldana just 2 months ago. Oh my goodness. At UFC on ESPN 16 in Abu Dhabi, and according to the newspaper, was previously listed as an instructor on the Jackson Wink MMA official website. However, any such reference has since been removed. Good, because Clarissa Shields is now there. All I've been told is that, so there's a quote here coming in from the Jackson Wink. All I've been told is that he is not an employee of Jackson Wink Academy, and he never has been. Gym spokesman James Hallinan told to the Journal. The initial report includes graphic details of the alleged assault. Be warned, people. On November 17, a woman reported the rape to a detective and said it happened at her home during a November 7 session with a trainer. She said she had been taking lessons from Freitas for several years, and on that day was having him massage her legs due to recent cramping. The woman said that Freitas is flirtatious with her and several other women he trains, that she at times found his behavior inappropriate, and that there was never any romantic relationship between the two. The woman told police she drank half a glass of wine and then ate breakfast and drank orange juice with Freitas before the session. She said she went to the bathroom and came out to find Freitas had prepared her a second glass of orange juice. The woman told the police that she added a shot of whiskey and ginger ale to the drink and about 30 minutes later began feeling sleepy as Freitas massaged her legs. She said that she quickly passed out and awoke hours later naked from the waist down and that Freitas was gone. According to the report, detectives observing the security tape saw Freitas possibly drop something into the woman's orange juice while she was in the bathroom, as his hands making a flicking motion over the glass. Afterward, detectives allege that Freitas removed the woman's shorts and appeared to force oral sex on her while she is passed out, and then later rubbing her hand on his genitals. According to the reports, detectives stated that the woman then stayed motionless on the couch for 15 minutes before sitting up. A noted grappler and credit inventor of the shoulder lock, known as the Bear Plata, Freitas is a multiple-time medalist in both World and Pan American Championships. Oh my gosh. Okay, so that is absolutely horrible. This story is still new, and I will follow it. I'll try to provide an update as to what happens to the instructor, what's going on here, what's happening, and I will continue this story for next week's podcast and see where it leads to. Well, that's a very dark way to end the podcast here, so let's end off with something kind of out there. So, it's being reported here that Mike Tyson and Jon Jones apparently is the best-selling pay-per-view of 2020, beating out the UFC. So, there's a ton of interest to this, and the fight between these two old guys, including a former NBA basketball player and an internet influencer, had just over 1.2 million buys. 1.2 million. That's strange. It's very, 2020 has been strange, but it's strange knowing that, look here, I was interested in the Mike Tyson fight, but who genuinely actually paid money to go see these two old dudes and an internet influencer fight a basketball player in like 3 fights full of undercard fighters? None of them are champions. It's very strange how big this fight became. I watched it at a friend's place. Okay then. So, I don't know. I personally would not pay for this show, but some people did. My friends did, and now you know. Mike Tyson and Roy Jones Jr. in 2020 was the best-selling pay-per-view fights of the year. I love Tyson, I love Roy Jones Jr., but seriously, out of any pay-per-view event that happened this year, that's like the highest selling one. The intrigue of Mike Tyson coming back, it intrigued me, and it intrigued millions of people out there. Nostalgia does wonders on people, alright? That's all I gotta say. And that brings to a close for today's podcast. You have been a great audience. I'll see you guys next week. All I gotta say is thank you. Thank you for listening to the GSMC MMA podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I would like to ask that you please remember to subscribe to the show and write a nice review. That really helps us. Also, if you can please follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Thank you, and have a good night.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts MMA Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. From movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.